session 7, and what we're going to talk about today are burns, diabetes mellitus, immunology, which will include psychogenic illnesses. Before I start with burns, I wanted to add a little something to the last session where we did equipment, and I think you were gone when we had the argument, the students and I. But wet to dry, I didn't go over it then. I think I've mentioned it a time or two, but I just need to say it again on wet to dry. Wounds that the order is wet to dry, it might be saline, it might be Dakin's, D-A-K-I-N, which is a Clorox, a 5% Clorox. And the physician will say what they want the wet to dry to be. If they don't say, it'll probably be saline. The argument I had this week in clinical, it was late, and the students love to argue with me. I've got all these years, but they haven't had any, but they want to argue. A wound need to be changed every day. So the student chose to change it about 5 or 5:30. And so when we talked about it, she said, we looked at the order, which is your first thing. Look at the order, and it just said dry galls to, and it didn't even say wet. It just said dry galls to wound, dry to dry. And so the student said, but they've got saline in there, and the nurse says that we're to saturate and then pull it and put saturate. And I said, well, that's not wet to dry. But see, it didn't say wet to dry. She said, well, the nurse, that's the way they've been doing it. I said, yeah, but it's not by the order. The order says dry to dry. And she said, well, all I know is I think they're doing it that way. I said, well, I bet they're using saline to wet it, to pull it out so it doesn't hurt as bad. That is against rules.
And I've seen it all the time.
Yes. And I said, it's to make you bleed. Wet to dry is to pull. It hurts, but it's to pull it out so
Oxygen can go to the wound.
Oxygen, nutrients, bleeding comes to that spot to start healing. And the student said, well, I don't think that's what it's for all the time. I said, I have never known dressing changes to be wet before you pull them to make it easy so they don't. I've never heard of it. They said, well, I think it can be. They wanted all 4 of them were fighting. And they said, the saline's in there, and we got reports. And I said, well, I'm going to go talk to the staff. So I went to the nurses, and they agreed with me, but they said, she has a fit if you don't wet it before you take it out because it hurts so bad. Well, I mean, I'm not going to fight with her. And so I told the student finally, I went down and I said, let me tell you, nobody's ever heard that you wet something to take it out so it won't hurt. It needs to hurt. It needs the oxygen. And you say it's done all the time. They wet it down so it doesn't hurt. And I said, and the student finally was convinced. She said, well, I'll just put barely any saline from the pre-syringe, just barely. I said, try that. But the word is that the woman just goes berserk if you don't wet it down before you put it.
Pre-medication?
I was going to say,
give her some
for pain.
Yeah, that's what
The
she
imagery
needs.
or?
Yeah.
Wait till she's real groggy and
Yes.
when
don't
she's
wait.
just about to fall asleep.
She needs medication before it. But anyway, so it sounds like everybody realizes wet to dry is supposed to bleed when you take it out. Do not wet it down. So I wanted to say that. Now, to start with burns, the thing is, I feel like I've already taught it, but we hadn't talked about burns. Okay, when you skin yourself, your knee or slide and it burns, it takes that layer of skin off and injures the cells. And so it heals. We say it's a scab. If it's a burn, a real thermal type burn, we call it eschar. It's just a different name for scab, but it means it's been a burn. And the thing is, the biggest thing to note about a burn of any kind, a scrape on your knee or any slide burn or whatever, is that it needs to heal and needs to be checked for purulence, because if you push that scab and little purulence comes out around, the scab's got to come off. It's got to come off because it's growing. And so with children, I used to put them in the tub and let them play a long time and let that scab get real soft and break it up. Break it and smile and try to debris is what you're trying to do. A scab will start to itch around the scab. It gets very red, and your biggest thing is to push on it a little bit, and if you see any purulence trying to push out, that scab's got to go. And we learn that when the little scabs like on children or yourself, but it's going to be the same principle with a thermal or a burn scab or eschar as it's called. So when that burn happened, I'm going to go to any burn, when it scraped and took the top off the skin, it opened up cells to the world, so they evaporate. And anything inside, which is usually sodium's inside, potassium's outside, well, when the top was knocked off of the cell, then sodium came out and potassium tries to go in, doesn't do very good because the cell is not sealed. But no, well, I'm so sorry. Sodium's outside, potassium's inside. So when the top comes off, sodium goes in, potassium goes out. That's the right one. And what carries sodium? Water. And so that's why burns get so swollen, is the sodium went into the cells instead of staying vascular, and potassium's out. So you've already, if it's a bad burn, what's a bad burn? We'll talk about it. If you've got a bad burn, then your vascular K is going to be high because it came out of the injured cells. So that is one of the signs and symptoms of a burn is high potassium, and of course we know it's going to be 3.5 to 5.5. So you would expect pretty soon that your potassium's high. Now the sodium might be, so the sodium, we expect a 137, something like that. Well, and it's taken fluid into the cells, into the injured cells, and so our sodium might be a little low in the vascular system. We know it's plenty in tissue. So those two, sodium and potassium, are kind of interesting to keep in mind. There are three kinds of burns, and that's thermal is the one we most see. The actual burning of our skin. We've got chemical, which is just that. The chemicals, when they're removed, it is a thermal burn. I mean, we're going to treat it just like any burn. And then radiation burn. And radiation is, as you know, it's that penetrating that you can't even see. It's burning through the bone, through the tissue, and we don't even can tell sometimes. Then pretty soon an organ starts acting up, or tissue acts up eventually with radiation. And so chemical, we just try to neutralize the burn and then try to treat the skin, which we'll talk about. So thermal's the big issue we want to talk about. Incineron, because it's the most common. And the percent of burn is pretty important, how much you are burned. Fortunately, the physician announces that. You don't have to do it yourself. There are lots of ways to analyze the percent of a burn, and I like the Brooks Army base, the Brooks formula. Brooks Army base in Air Force in California was where it originated, in California, Texas, where it originated. But it's so easy. And you could do it too. That's why it's so easy. There are all kinds, but that's to me the most simple. It's 9s, the Brooks Army formula of 9s. And what it is everything's divisible by 9. The arm, total arm is 9, each arm is 9. The leg, being bigger, is 18. So if you burned on the front, it's just 9 on the leg. The trunk is 18 in the front, 18 in the back. The head's 9. So if the face is burned, it's 4.5. I always try to get a laugh. I rarely get one with generic students. When I say the perineum is a 1, and people think that's underrated. A 1, I think it's kind of underrated, don't you? That area, it's a pretty important area in lots of ways for a 1%. Anyway, so that's an easy one, and it's they say that if your age plus the percent of burn is over 100, your life is in danger. And so if you're 70 years old and you have a 20% burn, you're 90, you got a hope. Butterfly McQueen, Prissy and Gone with the Wind, she was over 100, and a kerosene heater exploded in the winter or something, and she was burned 30%. Well, Butterfly McQueen was already 100 and something. Add 30 to it. She went on to heaven, as you would imagine, because it was way over 100. Burns are classified how severe, and they change the name, so I hate to even bring up, because periodically they change 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree. And I think those are the safest to remember, but they've gone from superficial to partial thickness, full thickness, just say 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, but know that they do have other names. Superficial is 1st degree burn, and it's your blisters, just red, painful, sunburn, 1st degree sunburn. 2nd degree, your burn still hurts. It's deeper, of course, but very edematous, where 1st degree was more blisters, 2nd degree is pretty edematous. And not that you'd know, but hair follicles and nerve endings are still intact. They may be burned, and you don't know that, but the physician can tell how deep it is and call it a 2nd degree, or I think they call it partial thickness. The full or 3rd degree burn that doesn't hurt, and that's not a good sign. And the reason is the nerves have been damaged. So just, you can kind of keep that in mind. Now, I hope it reminds you of shock when I mention burn, because if you have had a burn it's a percent, it's not just a blister. I mean, your body has a double-digit percentage, 10, 15, 20% burn. Then you have some physiological changes. And I've already mentioned that your potassium is going to be high, vascular, venous, when they do your blood chemistry 12. They're going to see that your potassium's high. Your sodium might be normal, but it might be a little low initially. But there are other things that happen that are just like shock, because if those cells have knocked the top off with burning, then the fluid is evaporating. So you're hypovolemic. And now we slip into hypovolemic shock. So you're going to have those symptoms of shock for hypovolemia because you are hypovolemic. You're evaporating like fury. And so you can review the symptoms of shock that we did a couple of times ago, but you can also think about them. Your blood pressure goes down because you're losing fluid. Respirations increase because when the blood pressure drops, the body tells the chemoreceptors tell the lungs, then you get in as much oxygen as you can, best you can, and that's to breathe more, faster, so I get more oxygen in. Urinary output, these are all, you've heard them before, I'm just listing them. Urinary output's down because your volume's down. And you're vasoconstricted. These are all still hypovolemic. And probably, as we still in hypovolemic shock, metabolic acidosis. And your pulses, of course, are weak, peripherals. And peristalsis has decreased, remember? And you know, I don't know how I can't remember we stressed the stress ulcer, because if slowness has decreased, then those gastric acids sit there and start marinating. That's the word I wanted. Marinating. And if they're going to marinate on that lining, they may work an ulcer through. And we increase metabolism because the body is going to try to, your blood pressure goes down, but the sympathetic nervous system is what's going to make it, try to push it back up so that we can live. And remember how potassium loves sugar. Water and sodium are crazy about each other, remember? Potassium and sugar are crazy about each other. So if I've got a high potassium in my bloodstream, sugar is going to pour out of my liver to join it, because wherever there is high potassium, the sugar wants to join it. So you may be hyperglycemic. Not that it matters that much. I mean, you're trying to strive for your life. So we don't do any damage to the brain with hyperglycemia, but it is interesting to note. The ulcer, just in case you two exam, the stress ulcer is called Curling's, Curlings. Curling's ulcer is the ulcer for shock when the body's going through all that. So someone's in a fire and the doors have been shut and there's no flames, there's no smoke, but we know it is a fire. And they do say to drop to the floor, that 12 inches is your salvation. And whether you believe in it or not, I don't smell smoke, nothing, but I know there's a fire in this building, then you need to drop to the floor. They say that is the last to go as far as the oxygen, and so you can breathe it. As soon as you're saved or rescued, and let's say you're not burned, are burned, they need to get oxygen on you, because as much, our red cells love oxygen. We keep talking about that. But as much as they love oxygen, they love carbon monoxide more. How much more? 150 times more. They'll take monoxide over oxygen. Isn't that just unbelievable? And so you have no control. The red cells are going to take the monoxide, and of course then you're dead, because the cells all need oxygen and you've just got monoxide. So they say that 30 minutes of 100% oxygen is like 4 hours room oxygen. So if you were just breathing 4 hours of room, 30 minutes of 100%, and that's always, they'll put 100% on a burn victim. Now, let's say that you're rescued and you are burned. And so, now, has anybody worked in a burn unit? Then I can say anything I want to, okay? No, no. I only did it in school when I was in undergraduate. But in studying it, because I've had to do the lectures and teaching, it ain't any different than it was 50 years ago when I was in nursing school. The only things that have changed are some of the artificial grafts to wait for your own graft. They'll use very expensive synthetic grafts to hold you over. We'll talk about that. But you can read my lips. There is no permanent graft but you. You're the most permanent and best is yourself, the autograft. And how can we do that? Well, I'll tell you in just a minute.
Yeah, I actually got burnt like 3rd degree. That was 20 years ago. I put my son on the sofa, and then I went in the kitchen. I was going to deep fry. My father gave me a deep fryer. Put all the grease in it, and the grease turned over on my legs. At the bottom of my leg, I was supposed to have a skin graft, but when rescue came, they just did, for to say we need some solution. But you can see my leg coming down. But I was so crazy because I just wanted to get home to my kids because I'm a single parent. So I just got my leg back up and went home. But then they contacted me and said I need a skin graft, but I never went. So right now on my leg is still where it's real light, where it was burned all over my leg, but my ankle part on the inside took it really bad.
Yeah, we might look at it in a minute.
Oh no, it's healed now.
Oh, completely,
but
not
yeah.
discolored or anything?
Yeah, but it's discolored.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can look at it. Okay, now I'm a specimen. Thanks a lot, Daisy. Okay. Let's
So-
look at that.
So, the first thing, it's the emergent stage, if you wanted to put it in stages. The emergent state is emergency, and they need to get IVs in you. And so they get an IV or two best they can in an area that hadn't been burned. And they need to draw blood because they need a baseline. And so they'll draw the chemistry 12 to make sure, and blood gases, because they need to see how much oxygen you have in your vascular system. So they'll draw blood, they start an IV, they'll probably put a Foley in because we need to watch I&O. We really need to watch I&O because it's a battle because you're evaporating so much with your burn. They need to get you, as the two biggest things is shock and infection. And so the best way is to get the hair cut. They say don't do the eyebrows. That there's so many wives' tale on eyebrows that they never come back and all that. Well, it's hair. They do, I think. But anyway, the hair needs to be cut. The excess skin that has burned needs to be gotten rid of. When you get to the emergency room, they will be as prudent as they can. Now, some people who have worked, and tidbits I get, is various places treat various ways. if they know it's a burn patient, they'll put on the gown, the mask, and the hats, and the booties, and work with you, gloves, in the emergent area. Some say we just get an IV, a Foley in, draw blood, and send them to the burn unit. And that may be, it just depends on your facility. But the point is to think infection, think shock. Those are the two to think. And so let's say they get up to the floor and they've got the IV. And the interesting thing about the IV, we need to keep up an I&O, but you can just pour the fluid in them because it's evaporating so quickly. And I say it's biblical. Everything 3 days reminds me of biblical here with Easter. But cells for 3 days, you probably, the literature says 24 hours to 72 hours. That's 3 days. You need to not be too concerned on fluid at $2.50 an hour, $1.50 an hour IV. The physician will tell you. I mean, you go by the order, but you don't have to say, wow, $200 an hour, is that right? Of course it's right, if that's what the physician said. Now, how do you gauge if they're going to overload? The two best ways in the world. You listen to the chest and how conscious are they? Have they got a mushed brain that's full of fluid? And are their lungs full? If they're still clear as a bell, but you cannot go by the I and O. You have to go by lungs, sounding full, and dyspnea. If they're dyspneic, you need to call the physician and say, they're dyspneic. I know you need to be able to tell them, but you know it's going to be way high and the urine output not nearly as high because they've evaporated so much of it. And so those are your two guides, consciousness and lungs. But if they're both doing great, you do need to look at the intake and the output. But don't be concerned when you see so much in and so little out, because the rest out has been evaporating. So that's still emergent. As soon as they get to the floor, now how much am I concerned about the high potassium in the bloodstream? Because of the heart. I have to be pretty aware of it. And so I don't know that I've ever known a physician to immediately give our treatment. Remember our treatment for high potassium, 50% sugar, IV push with insulin. That way, the insulin takes the sugar over to the muscle and takes potassium with it. I have been around, they may give them some K-exalate, either PO, but see, that way it's the GI tract slowed down, so we're not going to get a lot of K gone, or the K-exalate by the IV. No, I'm sorry, rectum, they may do it through the rectum, K-exalate, an enema, K-exalate enema, or a K-exalate PO. I think that's the only two ways you get K-exalate. And you know the rectum is very vascular, so it's going to pull that potassium out of your vascular system. I've never known a burn patient for them to hop on that quick. Now, but they could, and they might, either way. So it takes 3 days for the cell membrane that was knocked off by heat to start repairing. That's what I say, it's biblical, 3 days. And we know it is when we start hearing full lungs, or you notice their shortness in breath or exertion. So once the nurse is assessing and deep breathes them on that third morning, and they sound a little full, the IV's still running. The physician needs to be aware of that, and the IV cut back, because the healing of the membrane is taken over. and holding the fluid in now. And holding it in, it holds where it needs to. Only place, this is a great place, the lungs, good place to hold it. Sometimes they'll even put an NG tube in just to keep and irrigate it, just to kind of keep some activity going in the GI tract so they don't get the stress ulcer. Even in the acute, so Emergent was just getting ready. They've gone to their unit or a burn unit, and they're now in the acute stage. And that's the long-term stay up on the burn unit, baths, salves, dressings. And so as soon as they can, they want to get you in the bath, in the thermal type bath. And so they now debride as much as they can. They will medicate them with a little Valium or something, IV, and then put them in a, what am I trying to say, whirlpool, that's the word I want. Mostly they're whirlpools, may put a disinfectant in, and you put them in the whirlpool, and that's all right. They come out, and the nurse is in gown, boots, everything, trying to keep infection down. They get on a bed of some kind, and they're dried off and then taken to their room. And that's where we're going to salve them and bandage them. And this, of course, is burns that are bad, high percent. They didn't go home. So once they go to the room, the physician has ordered, of course, the physician ordered what disinfectant to use, but also whether it's an open dressing or a closed dressing, and the ointment to use on them. And so now they're at the room, and I'm going to tell you both, and it depends on your facility or your physician on whether they want open or closed wound. They're just exactly what they say. An open wound is you put the salve on, and that's what's interesting to me. They're still using the same things I used 50 years ago at Le Bonheur in Memphis, the same sulfidine, silver mylon. They're still using the same ones. That tells you something. They hadn't improved on that. And that's fine. It must work. So I tell, break a tongue blade. You know, the vats of the ointments are big. Take a swoop of them and wipe it on the burn and then throw it away. You don't want to double dip. Take the other side of it, and you get 2 applications with 1 tongue blade. And do that over their burned area. Now that, I'm going to do open first. And open is just that, they're open. And if it's a woman, you could put a washcloth over the nipples and the perineum. A man, I guess, just over the perineum. And they lay in their room, 95-degree room, all day. Now, you want to be sure and deep breathe them. The good old nursing things, deep breathe them, and exercises. They need to do some, I don't mean calisthenics, but as they lay there, they need to do isometrics, they need to do passive and actives. And so there needs to be all those things. And I just want to, this is a good place as any to remind you, nursing things, the W's. Have I brought those up to y'all before, the W's? And if I say the W's, they, to me, are conclusively nursing. If you home health, no matter what you do, if you'll think of those W's, you're the greatest nurse there was. Walking, water, which is hydration,
Right.
intake, output. Walking is ambulation. Walking, water, weight, which is diet, and we need to talk about that. Wind, which is deep breathing, and then wound. And we've got to address all those: water, walk, wind, wound, and weight. Weight being diet. And this is all in the acute stage. Now, that was open. There's advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is it evaporates. And so it needs another application or two during the 12 hours. They're mostly doing baths. I heard somebody in here one time, not you all, who was a burn unit, and they're just doing baths once a day. They used to be 3, then it went down to each shift, the 12-hour shifts, and this person said they were just doing baths once a day. So I don't know, it depends on your facility. I know they're not doing more than 2 a day, night shift and day shift. And so during that 12, you've got to reapply. For some people it hurts. It begins to hurt to put the application on, so that's a disadvantage. Now, the advantage is it's not as painful as far as wrapping and unwrapping the wet to dry I was talking to you about. The closed is we still put the ointment, but use Curlax or pads and wrap it. And then when you take it off at the end of your shift, so you didn't have to reapply, but taking off is going to stick and bleed, and now you're going to get some oxygen to that area, where when it was open, when I reapplied the ointment, that was stimulating and bringing, so it's getting stimulated both ways. It's a physician's choice and you carry it out. But just know, when you take that off, we don't put saline on it, right? To make it not bleed. We want it to bleed so that it gets oxygen and nutrients. So you can kind of come up with your advantages, disadvantages of closed and open dressings. That goes on. The eschar forms, which it will, of course, the scab or eschar, and you inspect it all the time by just squeezing on it. Is there any purulence around it? Yes, there is. Then in the bath today, we're going to have to be a little longer, and I'm going to push some. I'm going to try to make it some natural stimulation. Maybe if the whirlpool can be increased and they stay in the bath, and make that softer, because it's got to come off. We cannot have purulence under the eschar. And if you're just not able to break it off, it just won't break, then you have to tell the physician, and surgically they have to use a scalpel and get it off. But it's got to come off. It's warm, moist, and dark. The greatest habitat for infection. Warm, moist, and dark. Now, that's the acute stage. Then I think it's rehab stage. Let me think. I'd like to call it what they call it. No, I think that's what I'll call it. I don't know. Rehab stage. And that's where I hope we're doing some exercising, but that's the real stage where, I'm so sorry. Acute, we need to do a graft. I missed the graft part. They have denuded skin. I mean, it's gone. And they've got to have a graft. A sizable graft. And so we've got all kinds. I don't have one with me, but they're so expensive. The synthetic, to cover the skin while we wait for your skin to grow. And what they'll do is take something like a cheese slicer, and on the bottom of your feet, slice your skin. They put it in a media, a bacterial media, and it grows 150 times or 200 times faster than you can grow your skin. And so it's growing. While it's growing though, we've got to keep this skin from infection, and so they have these wonderful synthetic grafts. Some used to be, but I think they're more synthetic now, made from rice sheets, amniotic material, a potato. They said for a while they were using skins. They had to be really manufactured, but it was the skins of potatoes. But I think now it's just easier for them to do these expensive synthetics for their graft. But it is temporary, and only temporary until our skin is big enough for this graft. And they probably, your foot, where it was taken off, doesn't have to be from the foot, but it's a good place to take it. It's healed, and the donor site is not under infection fear, because it's, we watch it, but they may put a Vaseline gauze on it for a day or so, but skin heals pretty quickly. And so you want to be aware of your donor site, but we don't have to be as cautious as we are with the denuded areas. So this is ready in days, the auto, and the physician will then graft them with that. Hopefully not have to put staples, but skin stretches so, and if they're really stretching it, they may put staples. Preferably not, because have you seen people with burns that the staples show as scars? But supposedly we don't sew it down, you just lay it down, or the physician does, and pats it in place, and we really don't bandage it. So there's where the patient is really bedridden, and for about 3 days they're not to move, because that we don't want to dislodge the graft. Now they can do isometrics. They've got to do isometrics. They can certainly move and do exercises, passive and active, on the other areas of their body. So then they may have to take another graft and put it in the solution and send it to the labs that grow it. And people can have as many as 22 surgeries, they call them, and it's the grafts being applied. And I got a lecture, I had to do the burn lecture, hadn't burned nurse except when I was a student, and it was a good experience when I was a student. But I got the lecture to do, and I was shocked that what I was reading was exactly what I did years ago. And the push was, you just cannot push prevention enough. That's the thing. And it was so similar to what Daisy was saying. I think the day I got the lecture, 2020 had a 20-minute episode, and the woman was doing what Daisy said. She was babysitting her 4 children while her 2 married couple children were having a double date. She had the 4 grandchildren and did deep fried tacos or something, burritos or something. Yeah. And she was sitting. The thing is, she was cautious. She sat at the end of the table. She had her deep fryer here, and they're playing, having a big time. She'll fry them and just put them out on the drain towel, let them come by and pick them up, and everybody's having a glorious time. So when they're through eating, she wants to eat one, so she does one. She never gets up. She's not leaving her fat fryer. So she, and of course, turned it off. She's eating hers, and they're chasing a dog who came between the table and the wall. And the dog did fine, but the cord's still in. And the child followed the dog and hit the cord, and then the the deep fat fryer got the child. 23 surgeries
See, I
later.
would've got my
The
son, but I
child-
happened to put him on, and he was in the carrier, I put him on the sofa, then I.
The
went
child's eyes, I mean, looked
Jesus.
like an alien.
Oh my
Just
God.
2 spots for eyes and
Oh
no,
my
after all
God.
those surgeries and mouth. It's just, and she didn't even do anything. I mean, she stayed right by it,
Mhm.
but the cord was the culprit. And so prevention is the biggest thing with burns that you need to be conscious of. Now, and then, and I'm not mentioning, I did mention sulfidine, silver nitrate, sulfamylon, all those are still around. Silver nitrate, turns purple with light. It's still, people love it, it's just so messy. I didn't want to talk the W-weight diet. They are burning the calories because the body's trying so hard to replenish cells. So they need a good diet. When I did it and what I read, they're never hungry. They're just not. Well, they're not doing anything but pretty inactive. And they're not hungry, but if anybody needs protein, it's them. And one of the best things I read or found out, I don't think we did it at La Bonheur, but if you can do a good protein at night for bedtime with ice cream in it, then they've got 8 hours of not eating. If you do that in the daytime, they're not want another thing to eat. But if you can do it while they let it be working on them while they sleep, if they could just take that, it's high protein at night, and then sometimes they just end up having to put them on TPN because they will not eat. And we've got to get these cells back what they need to be doing. So TPN may be used. They need 4,000 to 6,000 at least calories a day, and they can't get out in the sun, so they need vitamin D, and they need the iron. They need vitamin C, and just remember our bell peppers. If they could nibble on those and get that, and then dried fruits for the iron, making those red cells. Now, this rehab stage, let's say they've gotten their graft, and now let's don't write on the graft. That's where a physician got real upset. Somebody wrote on his graft because we're told to write on our wound. That didn't go over well.
I think not.
That was not well at all. So that graft doesn't need any of your attention except inspection and making sure that it isn't reddening and not hot to the touch, beaming with heat. So infection is our biggest thing now. Then we go so we went emergent, acute, and now rehab. And rehab is where we try to keep them from getting contractures. You were trying when they laid in bed. Well, you really want them not to now. And just remember, muscles kind of want to contract, so you have got to really work on keeping them from contracting. And sometimes they have to have surgery to break because they have contracted during this acute stage. So they'll have to have some surgery. Or let me see if there was anything else on rehab. Yeah. It says the best indicator of how well a burn patient is doing is their weight. To see if they're
You said their
weight, if they're gaining some weight because they burn so many calories. It's called Z-plasty when they try to rearrange and lengthen a scar. so often keloids happen, which are just a scar that just keeps on scarring, and so it gets height, and nobody knows why the body just won't quit when it was scarred and that was enough, but it just keeps building. And so some people want the eschar cut down as well. So Z-plasty is the rearranging of surgically. Sometimes it's working on keeping down contractures. I think that's all I want to say on burns. Do y'all have questions? So, I think I'll ease into diabetes mellitus, which we've already talked snippets all through the 6 sessions we've had. And so I'm going to say things I probably have already said, but that's okay, because repetition, the mother of learning. And so, keep in mind that the pancreas is the size of your fist, and it's 2 organs in one. It's like an apartment building. The islets of Langerhans secrete insulin, but of no relationship is the rest of the pancreas, which produces your enzymes for digestion. And they don't talk to each other, they don't work together. They are 2 organs that just happen to live in the same house. And the interesting thing, and I think I've told you all this before, but maybe not, the islets, when they secrete insulin, it goes in the bloodstream. When the rest of the organ produces the 4 enzymes, lipase, amylase, pepsin, and one more, whatever they are, I'll think of it in a minute, the 4 digestive enzymes. One of them now, they say go together. So just know that they're the digestive lipase, pepsin, amylase. Anyway, the 4 digestive enzymes go into a duct that goes into the digestive system. So it's called an endocrine organ because it absorbs, but really it's both endocrine and exocrine, because it secretes into the bloodstream, which is endocrine, I think it is, and secretes into the ducts, which makes it exocrine. So it's both. And we'll talk more about that, maybe not so much because we're doing it now, in next week when we talk about the endocrine system. So, blood sugar is analyzed by our, if you watch the endocrine, the hypothalamus recognizes your blood has too much sugar, and it notifies the pancreas, too much sugar, pour out some insulin, because I want this sugar to be used as fuel and go into the muscle. And so I've told you all this before. Consider sugar as coal. The shovel to get the coal over into the furnace, which is muscle, is insulin. Your shovel is insulin because it's putting the sugar over into the muscle. I tell about James. James was a camper on Lookout Mountain my first year as a nurse, and I was by myself, and we weren't even doing blood sugars. This was nearly 40 years ago, and we weren't doing blood sugars, we were doing urine for sugars. And the drop of blood that we now get on glucose monitoring, they say that drop, it'd be 2 hours before the sugar comes out of it in your urine. So we're ahead of ourselves when we do blood sugars. It was a great thing when it came up. But that 40 years ago, we were doing just urine. And James' mother brought all the dietetic food for him. It's, the camp is not diabetic camp, but I'm a nurse and I can take care of a diabetic. So we went over things, and I was to give him insulin, da. They registered on an afternoon. The very next morning, James is up before morning watch. He came up to the clinic and he's vomited all night. So I took his blood, we had just started the blood sugar. So I took his blood sugar, it was 33. Well, that's not good, and I'm sure not going to give him insulin. So I said, James, we need to wait and see. That's what I wanted to do, is just see. He's been sick, and I didn't think it was diabetic related, but I thought his blood sugar was because of his vomiting. So he stayed up with me, very thirsty, and I gave him a little water, but he vomited it. He said, I just want pop. I want soda. And so I thought, with a 33, I don't care. I'm going to give him 7-Up. People, it's controversial if the caffeine in Cokes make you urinate or not. I don't see why they wouldn't. It's caffeine in it. Caffeine makes us urinate. But there's controversy that it doesn't cause dehydration. Well, I don't know why it doesn't.
Yeah.
So 7-Up is what I gave him, but I did it in 30 milliliter cups. I said, James, I'll give this to you, and it had sugar in it. But we're not going to guzzle it, because I knew, as sick as he was, he'd guzzle and vomit. I said, I'm just going to, every 15 minutes, give you 30. So that's what we did. He stayed on a Chase Lounge, and every 30 minutes I did it. He was holding it, so you can do it. 10-ounce Coke, and we do an ounce every 15. It took 2.5 hours. But he was holding it, and I'd give it every 15 minutes. He wanted more, but I said, we got to do this right. So got the last one in him, and I said, now James, I want you just to rest right here. Don't move, just calm down, rest, and I'll be back in just a minute. And I started down the hall, and I tell people there are not many absolutes in the world, but vomitus on a hardwood floor, you hear it, you know what it is.
Yes, that's true.
It's a sound that you never confuse. So I turn and I hear him vomiting on the hardwood floor. And so I go back, and he's hurting. His flank is hurting. So I take him to bed, and I'm kind of tired, and he is too. We're worn out. It's early afternoon now. And so I call his mom. Oh, did I do the blood sugar? No, I don't think I did. Which was a mistake. Not mistake. It would have been fine to do it. I don't know why I didn't. Now I would, but it was 4 years ago. Anyway, I called his mother and told her this is what I've told you all. And she said, how much insulin have you given him? And I said, oh, I've given him none. His blood sugar was 33. She said, oh, brother. Well, that was sad. I didn't think I did bad, but oh, brother. Oh, brother. So I said, well, his blood sugar was 33. She said, and she was not an alarmist. That was a good thing. She said, we need to probably get him to the hospital doctor. And because it's now late afternoon, so no doctor's office, we're going to have to take him to the emergency room. But she wasn't alarming, and she wasn't trying to, oh my God, she wasn't.
I guess the old brother was just.
She just said very calmly, we just probably need to get him to the emergency room. I said, okay. She said, I'll meet you all there, which was about 2 hours for her, about 17 miles for me. We got in the car and drove, and I just kept saying to myself, no, she's not a nurse. She doesn't know. You do not give insulin to a 33 blood sugar. And then a little voice was coming in saying, she's had a diabetic son for a while. She knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
So we got to the emergency room. And I do embellish the story when I say that I slammed the door in his face running in to see if I did right. That is embellished, but I didn't. We got out and walked in, and the physician was female and wanted to know the story, and I told her, and I said, now the mother seemed to think I should have given insulin. She said, I wouldn't have. I said, oh, good, I didn't. Good, I'm great. And so we put him over in a cubicle, and he's thirsty, and they give him anything he wants, fluids. He was wanting fluid, and they give it to him, and he immediately vomits or regurgitates it in the bath bucket. And I'm so glad I just watch him, because I let them take care of him. We're worn out with each other. And so they do his blood sugar, 500. 540. And he hadn't had a thing. And that's when I remembered in graduate school. And it hadn't been applied. You know, you can learn all this you want to, but unless you apply it and see it applied, it's hard. And then I remembered from graduate school that the storage, see, he hurt. The liver holds some for us in emergencies. And follow me here. The muscles screaming for just stasis. Give me some fuel just to live, not run circles. Just to be existing, I need some fuel. And so the brain is telling the body, liver, he's not eating sugar, so would you give him some sugar? So the liver is, that's the reason he had money. The liver is pouring out the sugar because he's not taking it. Now he took that, but it vomited. I'm sure some went in, but into the tissue. Well, no, it didn't, because he doesn't have the insulin. So his blood sugar is just climbing. The liver, what I gave him, the 7-Up, of course some absorbs the sugar. It's not going anywhere but the vascular system and in his urine or out the feces or whatever. But he's building up his there. The liver's pouring it out because the muscle is saying, please give me some sugar. Please give me. And the brain is trying to give sugar, but I'm not helping any. And that's where, if only I had done the blood sugar a little later in the morning, it was going to be higher, of course, because he's pouring out sugar. All I needed to do was to do a blood sugar again, and it would have been 70, whatever. And then I know what's happening. And then what would I do? I'm not going to guess. There's no guesswork with insulin. I call his pediatrician and say, here's the deal. He was 33. He's had nothing by mouth, essentially, but he is 75 now. Help me here. And the physician would have told me how much insulin to give. And so it's a great story. A lot of nurses have learned from it that just because you don't eat doesn't mean you're not getting a high blood sugar. And of course they gave him insulin, and he came on back, and we did fine. I think it was a GI bug that threw him, and then in throwing him, the muscle needed some fuel, and it wasn't getting it, and I didn't help it by getting. And I shouldn't have given it at 33, but I needed to take it again. Now I know, and I want you to always know, no, we're not going to give insulin, but let's take it again in a little while, see if it started to climb up. And so with that in mind, you kind of see how it all works. Your card that I've given you, to have the insulins, you just know that when they start, because they've got to have some sugar in the body before we make insulin try to work. It's got to have some sugar. So, and the brain has to have sugar, or if the brain doesn't have sugar, it dies. The neurons die, and never to rejuvenate. And I think when I was a student, Mr. Booker, never will forget his name, it was a ward, and we passed out urine cups, and Mr. Booker was sleeping. The techs passed him out. I was a student just working extra for money, and after supper, Mr. Booker was still laying there with his empty cup, and he was comatose, and he was hypoglycemic. Never was right again. Just blew his brains out because he didn't have sugar. And so that's what we're so scared of. And I just think giving of insulin is sometimes not scary enough to people. It's just give them the insulin. And we really need to say to ourselves, when does it start? Those early ones in 5 minutes. So hold off. Now, the students and I do talk. If the blood sugar is a 250, and the formula tells them sliding scale, because they can have a sliding scale. If it's this and this, give them that many units. This and this, give them that many units. And so if it's 1 unit, a lot of people say it's just 1 unit. And I tell them, one of the best nurses I know said to me one day, if the physician told you it can be 1 or 2, they would have written it. If it means 1, that's what they want, because 1 drops at 50. So if it's 250, I don't really have to wait for food. I can give them that 1 unit. But I do believe in giving 1 unit and 2 units, and people, it's so minute, people think it's not worth it. It is. 2 units will drop at 100. So I'm just asking you to be sure and watch. This hospital, I don't know that I approve of it, but it probably keeps money down. They only use, they'll use Levemir, which peaks, it starts and takes 2 hours to get to its peak and stays there for 24. But otherwise, they pretty much use the Novolog, Lispro, 5 to 15 minutes it starts. It's just easier for me to remember, peaks in 2 hours, it's over in 4. It's the only one they use here for the most part. And what I object to is Joe Schmo has been on regular for 50 years. When he comes to St. Thomas West, we put him on this. So he has his ailment he's dealing with, plus getting used to a short-acting insulin. And I don't think that's all good, but maybe economically it's just the only way. So be so on top. That's why I've given you those cards to keep in your pocket. And if you don't know those insulins, no. Now, we had an insulin, blood sugar that was at 250, and she was to give 3 or 4, maybe more than that. Oh yeah, it was about 4, because it was going to drop it to 50 if the person didn't eat. So, and she got tired of waiting because it was time to go home. She said, "Can I give you some crackers and peanut butter?" And I said, "Yes, that'll be fine. Rather than wait, you can do that." So be real aware of when your insulins start, and so scared about blowing out their brains. The brain has to have sugar. It just has to, or it dies forever. Now, we have varied, if you're low blood sugar. Now, what's the rhyme? Help me. Dry.
Hot and dry, pass me by.
What?
Hot and dry, pass by. Cold
Cold
and
and
clammy, eat some candy.
Eat some candy. Cold and clammy, eat candy. Hot and dry,
Pass you by.
pass by. Or
Sugar high.
what?
Hot and dry sugar high.
Sugar high. That can be that too. Hot and dry, sugar high.
and cold candy.
Or-
Give them candy.
Huh?
Cold and clammy, give them candy. And hot
Cold and
dry
clammy,
sugar.
give them candy. And that to me is so scientific. It's so intellectual and scientific. No, I like it because I used to try to learn symptoms of hypo and hyper. Forget it. Don't even try. It's just not worth it. Everybody's a little different. I usually ask somebody, how strange do you feel? But this really, clammy versus dry, is very obvious. So that's what I want you to remember. So, the hot and dry, you give them candy, is that right?
Sugar
Hot
high.
and dry.
Hot and dry, sugar's
Sugar.
high.
Sugar too.
Yeah, and, but cold and clammy, they, what's that one? Cold and
Give 'em
clammy.
candy.
Give them candy.
Because of sugar.
And you know, we can give candy for hot and dry, even though their sugar's high, I can give them candy and it's not gonna ruin their brain. But cold and clammy, if I give them more insulin, it's gonna ruin their brain. So hypoglycemia with insulin will kill the brain. Hyperglycemia with sugar, more sugar, it just makes more sugar in the veins, but does not kill anything. So you never go wrong to treat with sugar. And so if somebody feels peculiar out on the street and they say, I'm a diabetic, now if you can tell they're hot and clammy or whatever, that's great. But if you can't, get a lifesaver and make them chew it up. And because, you know, the saliva takes it in seconds. It can get, and if they're not feeling any better, they were probably hyperglycemic. If that lifesaver or a pack of sugar, if you're one that just keeps a pack of sugar in your purse, get it out and rub it in the mouth on inside the mucous membranes. And they should, it's almost dramatic that they will perk up. And so it's just something to keep in
Minutes,
mind.
seconds, I've seen it.
Is it's just
I
seconds.
mean, it's really fast.
And that's
It's
just,
almost scary, like, they're
Right.
like almost out of it, and you give them in there, right back, talking to you.
oh wow. And it's so dramatic. So, and if it's just adding sugar and they're already hyper, it's not gonna hurt them. Sends the blood sugar up. And even if they go in a coma, they're not killing their brain. Where the coma for the hypoglycemia does kill the brain.
I have a question.
Now, just a minute, let me say this. Let's break and continuing the diabetes aspect. Let's go to how do you treat, we were just talking about putting some sugar in the mouth, but the hospital, what's the hospital doing now? They've changed and varies. Years ago, we would do 2 packs of sugar in an orange juice. Then that said that was too much. They got the sugar from the orange juice and that was too much. So then we went to milk, and that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough sugar in milk. So now I think the hospital is just orange juice without the extra sugar. If you're in the outside world, anything that has sugar in it just is not a particular, I mean, piece of candy of any kind. You know, diabetics sometimes invest in that glucose stuff you can pinch and put in your mouth, but that's just a trap for money. I think, you know, good old sugar candy, jawbreaker, something. Skittles, chew it. Of course, if they're not with us enough to do that, then you've got that issue. So carry a pack of sugar around with you. Now, I want to talk the diet of diabetics. And some of it I've talked about, I think, but a diabetic nowadays can live pretty decent if they watch their carbs. They can have sugar, they just can't have too much carbs. And so when it's discovered that you have diabetes, then a dietitian or somebody does an interview with you, answers questions, and they come up with how active you are and how many carbs each meal and day and midday, mid-afternoon, how much you need. So if you're pretty active male, they generally say you can have 4 carb servings morning, noon, and night with a carb mid-morning and a carb mid-afternoon. A carb equals 15 grams. And so what I want you to do, I don't have it, is get used to this exercise of flipping your wrist to look at the label on drinks and things. And the two things, there's three things or four that I want you to look at. At the top is how many servings is in that. That's the first thing. And if it says 2 servings, then down where it has itemized carbs and sugars, realize those are for 1 serving. So don't think the whole thing is just 15 whatever. It's twice that for the whole thing. And I want to make that very strong emphasis. And so on that, you've seen the label and how many servings. Come down, and what I want you to look at more than anything else is total carbs. Total carbs. And if it's 15, then that's 1 carb serving. Then I want you to come to fiber. And how much fiber subtract from the 15? And you've got a little gimme there. A drink usually has no fiber, so it's going to be 0. And I don't even look at sugar. I mean, I'm not diabetic, but I like to look at that because I do like to know. People have the wrong idea that my husband's the worst. He thinks those little candies, he'll eat them like popcorn. They're 1 gram a piece. The little, they're 1 gram. And you eat 4 of them, that's supper. And so I just can't stress, I think 7 Lifesavers is a carb serving. 17 grapes are a carb serving. And I have a friend who's got his doctorate. Well, he was a student, and his field was diabetes, and I may have told you he calls grapes nature's trash food, junk food, because he said it's just a skin around sugar. But they have a little fiber to them too, so they have some good to them. So a woman, an active woman, is about 2 breakfast, lunch, supper, with a snack, 1 carb, 1 carb. But I've looked, just because food I think is underrated for health. It's just underrated, and I try to tell students, when you're teaching, mention foods that are natural diuretics, foods that are natural antibiotics, foods that help increase cell building, proteins, vitamin C and iron. Well, now on that tangent, where was I going with it? On carbs, I'll think of it maybe in a minute. But so breakfast, I can have protein all I want. I can have fat. It's just the carbs I need to keep down. So it's not that you're eating so much less. They say fat has been so wrongly treated that we need to be doing fat more than we do. It'll work itself out if we'll watch our carbs. And realize that my 2 carbs for breakfast, I can have protein, I can have fat, but I can only do the 2 sugars, breakfast, lunch, and supper, and then 1 in between. So that, I have a friend that says, you really put a lot of emphasis on carbs. And I tell her the reason I do, she's a nurse, I said, the reason I do is it's so easy. Somebody can have a dessert. A diabetic, if you've ever looked at the frozen foods at the grocery store, those individual purity on a stick, ice cream with chocolate on it, if you look, it's 15 grams. It's 1 carb serving. So you could have 3 carbs and then that dessert, and you get that sweetness you want. So if people would just center on carbs, we'd do great, and especially diabetics, if they'll do it. The trouble is, a serving of rice is it's about a half a cup. And I don't know that I've ever eaten a half a cup of rice, you know, and that's a carb serving. So that's the trouble, is our carbs. It's not that I'm crazy about Oprah Winfrey, but she didn't originate the statement, but it's a good one. She copied it from somebody, but she's the first person I heard. She says 3 bites is all you need. And in a dessert or pie, you know, that first 3 bites is really, if you'll do them slow, it's all you need. The rest is kind of not as good as those first 3 bites. And about anything, a bite or 2 is about all you need. But we go on and finish the cake because it's there. So I think there was more I wanted to say on diet, but that's the main thing, is carbs, and keep them in mind. If that serving said 30 grams, then that's 2 carb serving. See what did you look on here? So these crackers, see what your total carbs.
A whole lot of carbs.
The total carbs on that.
21 grams.
All right, so that's about a 1.5 carb. And I just think it's good to know kind of how much carbs you're eating. It'll make you think, and you'll think, I don't really need another bite-sized Snicker. 1 was fine, and it was 1 carb. So that's the diet part. Now, we've already talked about insulins, or not insulins, I'm sorry, the injections that lower, you know, Byetta, Bydureon, Victoza. Review those. Remember, we're now on once-a-week ones. I've given you Bydureon, and we've gone over those. We don't need to go over them again, and they're not the only 3. A lot of new ones are coming out, but just keep in mind, and what are they doing? How are they doing it? For the most part, they're slowing digestion so that your absorption of sugar is slowed up and the pancreas can keep up with it, is what we're trying to do. Got a lot of POs out. That forum is the one that's probably the most popular because it's cheap. And it does a pretty decent job, I think. I read some bad stuff off and on about it. So any of the hypo or the anti-hypoglycemic, hyperglycemic drugs, just kind of know their action. What are they doing? Are they stimulating the pancreas? Are they working on the GI system? Are they cutting the release of sugar from the liver? Some of them do that. It's not, hey, ultimately I just want my blood sugar down. And so you don't have to know those things, but it's kind of good sometimes to know them.
So can I ask you that, okay, so if we watch our carbs, does it eventually balance everything out with our sugar?
Do what now?
If we watch our carbs, does it eventually balance everything out with the sugar and
If the carbs are right, sugar's so satisfying that if you have kind of get used to it, it usually is satisfying. Now, not at first. This dietitian I know says the body wants more of something. If you've been giving it a lot, it's going to love more and keep telling you it wants more. So you have to kind of talk to your body too and say, let's try this a few days and see if you get used to. I'm giving you enough carbs, but you want more. we've already talked about lisinopril being an ACE inhibitor that it protects the kidneys. And ACE inhibitors lower blood pressure. But somebody discovered that, I think it was serendipitously, they discovered that an ACE inhibitor will, in kind of lowering the blood pressure, rescues and protects the nephrons of the kidneys. And you know, that's our havoc, is tearing up our renal system. Diabetics have problems with renal issues. They have problems with neuropathy. Because if you want to think of sugar as glass slivers, that's havoc to the capillaries going through there single file, scraping and tearing up nephrons. If you want to think of sugar as glass, it's just tearing up everything. And so when that glass, that sugar, goes through our capillaries and scrapes, it inflames them. And that's our whole problem, is our body stays so inflamed. Diabetics just keep an inflamed body. And I don't want to repeat it, especially if it's on these sessions, but I did talk about, didn't I? Just remind me, Dick Cheney and his
Stents.
the fat and the lubricating. Is that ringing any bell? Dick Cheney, former vice president. Well, it's not diabetes, but it's kinda. I meant to if I didn't, so I'll just repeat it and it'll be fine. It's the same as our oil, cholesterol, being kind of a salve for inflamed areas. And when the body's inflamed, our cholesterol, if you think about it, it's oily. If you want to just be very elementary, it's lubricating our inflamed raw areas. And for whatever reason, we have a lot of inflammation. And so what does the body do when it sees that? It shoots out cholesterol. So we've got a little higher cholesterol. And so the Vice President Cheney had a heart attack. Stop me. Does this remember, y'all? He had a heart attack, and they discovered that his cholesterols were sky high. So that translates to he's inflamed. Something with him, he's got heart conditions or whatever. I don't think he was, I know he wasn't diabetic, but he had some heart issues always, but he has a heart attack. So even the heart issues, he probably had inflammation galore. So the media says, woo, his cholesterol was astronomical. So they get him down, and the media was so proud. This dietitian told me this. She said the media was so proud. They got it so low. He has 2 more. Well, he has 2 more because he didn't have anything to protect his inflamed areas. So he has 2 more heart attacks. And you say, well, the first one he had a high. Well, he was a mess, the first one. When they get him all down on his cholesterol, he had no protection from his inflammation. So that's why I sometimes argue with physicians, especially if it's a loved one of mine, that they're so adamant on statins and the cholesterols and cutting them back. And the body kind of wants them. I carry on with a friend physician of mine about statins and cholesterol, and he said, statistics. I said, yes, I know it, but also be practical. The body is shooting up cholesterol because there's some reason. Now let's get to the reason, and that's the problem. And it takes probably too much money to find the reasons. But we do know diabetics are loaded with inflammation. And if you'll just visualize slivers of glass scraping veins, they stay inflamed. So I would expect them to have a higher cholesterol. And so is it right to get the cholesterol down on a diabetic? I don't know. I don't know what to say. Then going to the test, H1AC. H1AC, I mean hemoglobin 1AC. And we've already, I think, been over it, but let's just do it again. Your red cell lives 140 days. So at 90 days, every 3 months, they may check it, your 1AC, a diabetic, because it doesn't lie. It holds sugar, that red cell. So when they do it at 90 days before it dies and see it covered with sugar, they know you haven't been compliant with your diet. And what do we want?
Doesn't lie,
Do what?
Doesn't lie, the hemoglobin.
Doesn't, no lying. The last I heard, it was 6 and 7. Is that what y'all have heard that they want? Between 6
Yeah,
and
I
7.
thought it was 5 to 7.
7.
5 to 7.
And then I heard they're trying for 6, but that's probably, what money? Saying you got to have more tests, you got to do this and that. Anyway, the H1AC.
But I had a doctor tell me that doctors are always telling them to check their blood sugar, and they check their blood sugar, but that the hemoglobin A1C will show diabetes before your regular blood sugar does. So you could be a diabetic and for 3 months walking around with a good fasting blood sugar. But if doctors did hemoglobin A1Cs, they would see, like you said, it's already coded. You just haven't gone into full-blown
That's
diabetes.
interesting.
So
That is
when I used to do health coaching, they used to tell us, don't tell them about fasting blood sugars. Tell them to get their doctor to do hemoglobin A1Cs because they'll catch the diabetes. Right,
earlier.
especially when they're so-called pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
so
that's good to know.
people are walking around thinking they're fine.
Yeah.
Oh, my fasting blood sugar was fine, but if they did the hemoglobin A1C,
They'll
they
see
would
that
see
it's-
yes, that right.
Yeah.
See the whole story.
That's
But
really
the
good to know.
hemoglobin A1C maybe is more expensive, so they're doing
That's
the
it, I'm
fasting
sure.
blood sugar.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Sharon. That's good to know. Now, okay, so, I tell the story, well, before I do that, the diet, oh, here we go, on diet drinks and artificial sweeteners, you know, I'm just so against them. Because,
They taste so good. It tastes so good.
I know. Diet sodas,
What about the new stuff, that Truvia? Isn't that
Actually-
supposed to be
do what?
better? Isn't that Truvia or something supposed to be better?
I
Yeah,
think
stevia, everything saying.
Yeah,
stevia is
stevia is
natural,
wonderful.
it's not gonna
Yeah,
affect you.
because stevia is the plant, and it, yeah, we'll get to that in just a minute. Diet sodas actually cause weight gain by boosting insulin production, leading to excessively high insulin in your blood that triggers greater fat accumulation and even more craving for sugar. That's your artificial.
Diet soda.
Diet sodas. And people think they're so great, you're not drinking
It has
sugar.
diet on the label.
Yeah,
They're like,
yeah.
no,
Uh-huh.
I can't have
But
it.
just keep in mind, it triggers that craving for sugar. Now, do you fall in for it? Probably some way or other you do. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And then back to the sugars and stevia and all those. Stevia is the only one I think anything of. I don't use them, but if I did, stevia would be what I would, because it is the plant. And if you get it from Whole Foods, it's in an oil. It's the oil from the plant. Well, it's the plant juice, and then they put it in glycerin. And it's in a dark bottle because apparently light hurts it. Now, at the grocery stores you can get it. It's individual. The only thing I don't like is it's been processed into the little individuals. But it is still from the plant, and so I want it more than any. All the others do some peculiar things. Now, saccharin, years ago it was the first, and it got a bad deal because they said, oh, there's a quote, it was the equivalent, when they came out and said saccharin's bad for you, they said it was the equivalent of a rat of you and I drinking 800 Diet Cokes a day. That's how inaccurate it was, the stats on that. You just have to really be careful of statistics, I think. So it got a bad deal. It's not nearly as bad as it got. Then some of the others have gotten, I don't think are good.
Nutri-Seed.
And then, but stevia I do because it's a plant. I know, and I don't think I've told you all, this class, one of the refreshers one time said that it was a secondhand story to her, but she was on a plane, 3 seats type. She was at the window. A very attractive woman was on the aisle with her child in the middle. And when the stewardess came by asking about drinks, they said what they wanted, and they wanted, the little boy and his mother wanted a Coke. And the stewardess said, diet? And she said, oh no, we want real. And so when the stewardess walked away, the woman looked at the teller of the story and said, my father discovered aspartame, or what aspartame, and made us all promise we'd never, ever touch it in our mouth. And the reason that I've been told is, and that's sweet, is it equal? Is aspartame equal
I'm not sure.
or sweet and low?
I get them all confused.
Sweet and low saccharin.
Yeah,
Okay.
sweet and low is saccharin.
So it's equal. It's equal, I think. And so, and it was top for a while. People thought it was great. But here's what the deal is. It's made of, as an amino acid. It is equal, or aspartame is our sweet amino acid. We've got 22. We make 8 of them, and then our body, we get the rest of them we get. So it's the sweet one. And so the inventor thought, let me just potentiate that amino acid. So because it's amino acid, and we like amino acids, they are protein, then it must be good for us. Well, then it was described to me, if a bricklayer is making a wall, and the bricks are fine, and then all of a sudden I have a huge gorge, or huge, there's a hesitation. That we do it, the mason puts it in, but now he's got to work around it. And is that area going to be as strong as the rest of the wall? And he's got another one. Okay, you had some diet yogurt or dietetic cereal. So your protein walls are patched with abnormal amino acid. And so that was the explanation I was given. And but then somebody retorted with, doesn't extra go out in the urine? Well, I don't want proteinuria either. So I think it's best just to watch. Just really believe in us watching what we eat. You know, we've already talked about cruciferous, is that the word, for broccoli and cauliflower. Those are so good for the liver. For whatever reason, they cleanse the liver. And then, of course, we've talked about milk thistle, which could be which is an herb or a weed or whatever. But I just do emphasize the food aspect. So now I'm still on diabetes, but I want to talk about the inventor, Dr. Banting. I just have to. I have to give him a few moments for discovering insulin. Dr. Banting was a Canadian who, insulin was discovered by him in 1921. So he was out of medical school and had spent a year or two in the war, World War. And so that gives you an idea how he was young. And he was from rural Canada, so he was limited in his abilities in life. But he wanted to be a doctor, and he got to medical school. And as soon as he got out, the war was going on. He went to Europe, and apparently his eyesight wasn't great, and he stuttered. So he had thick glasses and stuttered. Came back from the war and wanted to practice in the urban area. He didn't want to go back to the country, and one of the big cities, Montreal or one of them, Ottawa or something. And he started practice, but like the first month, he brought in $4, and he knew that wasn't going to work. So he went over to the medical school and asked if he could do guest lecturing. And they said, oh, we'd be glad for you to, for part-time. Of course, they give him the lecture nobody wants, which was diabetes, because this is 1920. And all they know about diabetes by 1920, that was 100 years ago now. So all we knew was that they knew people had been dying. They can look at mummies, they can look at old bodies, and they know they had sugar, too much sugar in their body and their veins. But it wasn't until 1898 now, and this is 1920, that they realized it was the pancreas, that was their culprit. They didn't know about the islets and the rest of it. They just knew the pancreas was the problem. That's all Dr. Banting knew. So he decided he needed some Bunsen burners, he needed a lab, and he needed some help. And they went to the dean of the medical school and asked for that. And they said they didn't like it. They said, do you know there are state-of-the-art labs in New England, in Europe, and here in Canada at this rundown medical school, all I can give you is an attic room. So that's what he did to appease Dr. Banting. He gave him an attic room and some Bunsen burners, and he wanted some dogs. He got a couple of those, but they couldn't get anybody to help him. Nobody wanted to help him. But finally, 2 medical students decided to split the time, part of the semester and part of the semester. And Best, if you know anything about the discovery of insulin, Banting and Best was the medical student who helped him. And they started working. They knew it was the pancreas. But you know, it's interesting when you read, they cut off the blood supply, and they try things. They took out the pancreas, dissolved it, put it in liquid form, gave it to the dogs by IV. They just couldn't come up with much of anything. And then they realized that there, I guess microscopically, there were spots that were like blisters. Well, of course, that's the islets of Langerhans. So they aspirated just from those, injected a dog who was in a coma, went to lunch, came back, and he was running around. But you know that you can't stay that way. You've got to have another dose. So now, how much? It's that extract from that bubble, but how much? And so the story is that they knew it was the extract, and that's what they called it for a while. But they injected, finally, they said 9 months from the day Dr. Banting got his permission. 9 months later, they injected their first patient, diabetic, in the hospital, and the blood sugar did nothing. And see, they don't know whether to use human. I mean, they can't use human. So they've got to use animal. Is that going to work? So they go to slaughterhouses and get pancreases and pull and took it to, and then you know what the body does with anything not theirs, it fights it.
Yeah.
So they don't know what to do. The patient did nothing. He didn't react, he didn't lower his blood sugar, and they're back to zero. What do? We know it is an extract, but what do? And just about that time in walks a colleague of the medical student. Actually, he was the one that was going to do the other half of Dr. Best. And he was very smug. He said, even as we speak, the dean of the medical school hired him to work on it on the side. He said, as we speak, I have just injected a diabetic and the blood sugar's gone down. So this fella, who we don't even know his name, it worked. And it absolutely devastated Banting and Best because they felt like he took theirs. But Banting and Best tried to say it's for the good of man. But Alistair Cook, who did a movie on it, said the biochemist, the colleague of the medical student, broke the cardinal rule of biochemistry. He didn't keep good enough notes, so he couldn't repeat it. So now they're both doing it, and Banting and Best ended up getting the credit and doing it and getting all that credit. So while that's going on, the United States had a Vice President Hughes under Calvin Coolidge, and this during that time, and Mr. Hughes, Vice President Hughes, had 2 daughters, and one of them has diabetes. She's 9 years old, I think. And what the wealthy did, I mean, if you weren't wealthy, you just wasted away. Your muscles didn't get the energy, so they wasted and started digesting themselves for energy. And so the wealthy could go to sanitariums, which is what the Hughes did. They put their daughter in state-of-the-art sanitarium in New England, and if you read about them or see anything about the diabetic sanitariums, depressing is an understatement because everybody's dying. I mean, you eat, you're so ravenous because your muscles are begging for something and you can't do it, so you want to just gobble it up. And what does it do? Just sugar in your veins, and you're not getting it over there, and you're still hungry because the muscles are begging, and it's just vicious. And they knew nothing. Now, I will give them credit. They knew to measure the food because they knew how much food made too much sugar. So there's where the sanitariums were good. It prolonged life while we got a cure. And so she was there. It was depressing. People are always dying. And she'd have a good friend, and the friend died. And so she stayed depressed. The family hated for her depression, so they did what a lot of places do, restaurants and everything. When a restaurant has a good cook or a good waitress, or some hospital has a good nurse, the wealthy hire them. And that's what the Hughes did. They hired one of the best nurses at the sanitarium to come home with them and take care of their daughter. And they had a home, wealthy family, the vice president, had a home in Bermuda, one in the Hamptons, place in D.C., and they wanted this nurse to just live with her and measure. They knew activity was something that you've got to have, because you know yourself, exercise will take some of that sugar over to the muscle. Now, it can't keep you alive forever, but it can keep you alive for a while. So they knew exercise. See, they knew a lot. They knew the food and carbs. They knew exercise helped some, but you can't have too much or it wants more. The muscles are begging for more, and you can't do it because you don't know how to get it over there. So they sent the nurse and Elizabeth to Bermuda, to their home in Bermuda, just thinking maybe out from under the stress, the death, maybe the mist from the ocean, the sunshine would do something. Well, it didn't do a thing. And the nurse could hang on just so long, but Elizabeth was dying. And so she wrote him and said, she's dying, and she wants to come home. So they let her come home, and they put her right back into the sanitarium where she had been. But about that time is when Dr. Banting discovered his extract. And it hit the news just everywhere because it was such a big deal. And so Mrs. Hughes, the vice president's wife, talked to the head of the institution and said, is there any way we can get that extract? And he said, oh, the man is overrun in Canada. I don't think there's any hope. And she said, would you give me a letter of introduction and I will go. So that's what she did. She took a letter of introduction to Dr. Banting, waited her turn. When she got to him, she told him about her daughter. And Dr. Banting said, you know, if I show preferential treatment, they'll say it's your money and your husband's prestige, and I can't. And he said, do you understand people have walked 4 hours to get here this morning to line up for the extract to see me? And she said, Dr. Banting, my daughter can't even walk. By now she's at 40 pounds and she's in fetal position. And she said, my daughter can't even walk. And something finally hit Dr. Banting. And the story that I read, and also we've seen the movie, in 4 months, Dr. Banting was carrying Elizabeth Hughes all over the world as his poster child. Mm-hmm. And it says that she received 44,000 shots in her life. And you know it wasn't the best insulin. Mm-hmm. And died of cardiac problems. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's to me significant that she wasn't a double amputee in the nursing home. Mm-hmm. And so there is a book out. I just read, I first read this story. I saw a book at Green Hills Library on the table and it said Dr. Frederick Banting. And so I thought, Banting, the only Banting I know was diabetes. And I read it, and it was this story I've told you. But then I saw an Alistair Cook movie, Enough Glory for Everyone, and it may be on Netflix, Enough Glory for Everyone, and it's the story of the medical student almost winning out. But then, 1910, so this is 10 years old, the book Breakthrough, Elizabeth Hughes, The Discovery of Insulin and the Making of a Medical Miracle, came out 10 years ago. I didn't realize it was that. I didn't read it till this past year because I knew the story and I'd read it, but it was really a good book. And what I don't understand about her, I really don't, is that she never told anybody. Her daddy, once the insulin was discovered, her daddy gave huge amounts of money to the institute, but she never told. When she became engaged, she did tell her husband, but the children didn't grow up learning it really, and she kept it such a secret. She could have been such a crusader for it, but I guess there was stigma, and it wasn't until 1982 that her grandson wrote the New England Journal of Medicine and broke the silence and said, my grandmother was one of the first recipients of the extract. They did finally name it insulin because of, in German, Eilitz is insulin. And because he won the Nobel Prize for medicine. Canada never won it, but he won it. What do we go to? 430. Mm-hmm. So he won the Nobel Prize, but he had to share it with the dean. He refused. Dr. Banting said, I didn't
want to give him anything. But
he said, yeah. And he said, I will take it if I can get it with Best, the medical student. Well, they wouldn't do that. So he refused to do it. He said, but he said, because the dean was going to go receive it in Oslo, you know. So Dr. Banting wouldn't go. But the dean, to his credit, did give him half the reward. It was a $40,000 in 1921. $40,000. So Dean McLeod kept 20 and gave Banting 20, and Banting gave Best 10 of it. Dr. Banting went on, and World War II broke out, and he was real big on anaerobic and aerobic medicine. And he was knighted and by the Queen, and died in a plane crash in World War II. Mm-hmm. But it's a real wonderful story, and what I love is that you see diabetics, this first diabetic that got treated, I'm sure she was a good diabetic, compliant, because she had a nurse that taught her. But she lives to 74. And you can understand a lot of people that aren't diabetics die of heart problems.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm sure her diabetes was a little hard on her heart, but I think it's so wonderful that you realize if she can do it, diabetics can live a long, good life if they're careful and watch the carbs. I think, any questions on diabetes? Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. Now, I want to go over into immunology. And I meant to bring it. Oh, I may have it. We didn't know a lot. Let me stop this. Oh, yeah, no. We didn't know a lot about diabetes until the early 80s when AIDS got us busy. Now, prior to that, about all we knew about immunology was our immunizations. And, yeah, I found what I was looking for. And I don't have a date on when we learned about immunizations, but I can kind of tell you some of the dates. Edward Jenner lived in, I want to say, late 1700s, and he was just a rural physician, and the late 1700s, I don't think we need to praise the creator or that smallpox, how horrible it was, and that we have the vaccine now. But back then, it was no respecter. Kings, queens, everybody got it. And it scars you so that it looks like a burn. Once it heals, you just look like you've been burned.
Wow.
And it's just terrible. So that was rampant, smallpox. And so, and nobody knew what to do. So a milkmaid one day, milks cows for people, came to Dr. Jenner, and you all probably know the story from bacteriology when you had it in college, but she had sores on her, and they looked like chicken pox. And Dr. Jenner said, "Well, I'm so sorry. I think you have the deadly smallpox." She said, No, it can't be, because I've had cowpox. And that interested him. And she told him, she said, whenever we have cowpox, none of us have ever get smallpox. And so who knows what her sores were, but he began to do his own little research, and he's the one that discovered that if you have an illness that's very similar, of course we can say you build antibodies, but he didn't know it was that. But when you have an illness that's so similar, you're ultimately making antibodies that keeps you from getting the dread disease. So he discovered this or whatever and decided, and he called it, he realized that, now he is the one that tried it out. I used to think it was his son, but it wasn't. It was his servant's son, I think. He took the purulence from a milkmaid who had cowpox, took the purulence and scratched and put the purulence in a normal person, unsick person, and they got cowpox. So then, now this is where I thought it was a son, but it was a servant's son. Now, I don't know who would do that. But, he took then the purulence of smallpox and put it in the person that had cowpox, and they didn't get it. And he called this whole thing a vaccination after the word for vacca, which means cow. I think it's Latin or something for cow. And that's where we got our word vaccination. So it was a glorious thing because now there was something to fight smallpox. And that was to take the purulence of cowpox and put it in someone and they wouldn't get smallpox. Now, I always have taught that Edward Jenner in it was late 1700s. Yeah, the late 1700s. But we know now that early 1700s, the Turks, before 1721, there's evidence that the Turks, and this, Dr. Jenner was late 1700s, the Turks were doing this kind of thing. And even before then, there was other people. So he's the first. I've asked myself and others why he gets credit for discovering this. And they said because he's the one that wrote it up. Nobody else knew it to write it up. Well, the years passed, about 80 years passed, and it was a glorious thing because we had a treatment against smallpox, and the dreaded illness was cholera. And so Dr. Pasteur, Louis Pasteur, and homogenization, is that right? He was working on cholera, and he stopped for the summer, came back, and he had cholera on agar plates, and it had dried. Well, he just picked up where he left off and scraped the cholera germs or cholera whatever and dissolved them and used them and injected some chickens. That's what they were using to, and the chickens didn't do anything. So he thought, well, it lost, it's been sitting here all summer, it's worthless. So he got fresh cholera and gave it to the chickens, and the chickens didn't get it. And he thought, why didn't they get it? Could it have been what I did? And there's where he realized you don't have to get antibodies from a similar. You can get it from the real if it has deactivated some. In other words, his description was the shell is still there, but the inside is gone. So the shell is in the body and it makes the antibody. The antibody copies the shell, not what was inside. Isn't that clever? And so he is given credit for the discovery of the fight against cholera. So that's we knew that much all through these years, enough that vaccination, we need something similar. What is polio is the actual, isn't it? The actual, I think, just kind of deactivated some live. But all our vaccinations were based on this kind of idea. Well, that's what we knew. Now let me talk about just a minute our immunity that we've progressed to know, and this is before the AIDS. We knew all this. We knew that we make some antibodies, and antibodies fight. Now, the milk that a baby gets from their mother has antibodies in it, but they only last about 4 months. And so, but they get some ready-made. In other words, they're not making them. And so they're called passive immunity. You got it and your body didn't work for it. So passive immunity is you got the antibodies already made. And you got them really naturally through the mother. Natural passive immunity. Natural passive immunity. Now, I can go down to the emergency room downstairs and get gamma globulin, and it's an antibody. But I didn't get it naturally from my mother, I get it acquired. So there are two passive ways to get antibodies. Passive natural from a mother, passive acquired. But they're both ready-made. My body is not active, it's taking it in, and they're passive. That's the two passive ways. The two active ways to get immunity is acquired, natural, when you have the illness. If I have the measles or the mumps, my body builds up the immunity and the antibodies, and that's a natural active because my body made them. And then I have the acquired active when I get a vaccination. And the vaccination is an antigen. It's something from the illness, and I get it, and my body builds up an antibody for it, and that's an acquired immunity. That's artificial. So we've got, when we get a vaccination, it's acquired or artificial immunity. We're going to make our own antibodies. If we get the illness, we are going to make our own antibodies, and that's a natural. We're going to make our own. So it's active. The passive, or the mother gives us through milk, and it's natural, or acquired passive. We get them from the emergency room. And when I talk to you all about the ITP, where the antibody built on the platelets, do you remember that? And one of the treatments is an antibody, IV, and that antibody they are hoping will kill this antibody. That's just a little sidebar on that. Now, then the AIDS, well, and best I can research, we know, what is it? Dr. Banting and Best did 1921 the insulin. 1929, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. So 1929, we hadn't had penicillin for 100 years. Isn't that amazing? Not really, the real use of it. They say the war in 1945, really got us going on it, even though it was about 15 years it'd been played with in the labs and so forth. Well, we know that, so an antigen is, I used to call it a foreign substance is entered into me and my body makes an antibody. My physiology teacher in graduate school, she couldn't stand for me to call it a foreign substance, and I know why she didn't, so she let me call it your body thinks it's foreign because of autoimmune. Autoimmune, just you wake up one day and the body says, my goodness, I don't think some of this stuff around here is normal, i.e. the platelets. You know, we woke up one morning and it didn't think our platelet belonged to us and made an antibody. So the body perceives something is foreign. It may not be foreign, but the body thinks it is. And that's all it needs to make an antibody. So antigen is a perceived alien to the body. Now, if it's your vaccination, it is alien and your body's making the antibody. So you've got your antigen antibody. when you get the tetanus toxoid, that is your antigen, and it's going to make you make antibodies. A toxoid is an antigen. It's going to make you make antibodies. An antitoxin is already made antibodies you're getting when you hear about antibodies. Now, I think, so we know that when you get sick, you don't feel good, you possibly get fever, and if it doesn't go down, you take an analgesic. If it doesn't go down, then you sometimes go to a doctor. The doctor decides whether it's bacterial or viral. And you know the viral, we don't have anything to do for that. Bacterial, praise the Lord, Alexander Campbell found antibody. So we've got antibodies for the bacterial, but we don't for the viral. So I want to take the fate of bacteria and then the fate of a virus, and we can follow that through. So with bacteria, you get it. Oh, they say we've got our universal barriers, which are mucous membrane. They cannot cut out anything. The mucous membranes and the skin protect us, and they're our specific universal protection. Now, they can be penetrated, and so let's say a germ, a bacteria, penetrates the mucous membrane. You have been up all night, you hadn't been eating good, you're not sleeping good, your mucous membranes are thin, and it's real easy for a strong bacteria to get through it. When it gets through it, it can get in the bloodstream. And there we are, we've got fever. And what I think fever, and I've already spoken about it, I know I've spoken, I've got to say it again. Fever is your best friend because it's trying to burn it up for you. It got in the bloodstream and the body recognizes this is foreign. Let me see if I can kill it with heat. And that's where your heat. So don't take an antipyretic and go to bed. Take a shower and go to bed. The fever will put you to sleep. Now, if your head's pounding, go on and take something. But I try not to and let that fever kill. That's what was meant to be. So, and the body, as soon as it sees something foreign, it will try to phagocytize. And it does. The body's wonderful to grab it, and you didn't even know it went in. And you're wonderful. You felt a little bad this afternoon, but I feel pretty good now. Got a good night's rest. Well, the body phagocytized, and you didn't even know. But if the body phagocytizes, and you're producing it so fast, they're coming in and just multiplying so fast, the body knows it's losing ground. So that's where it tells the brain, let's try some heat. And the brain then puts heat to us. So you don't want to take an antipyretic immediately. Let's see what happens with some heat. So that's what our body does, phagocytize and heat. And that's, I think, what the Creator had in mind. Now, the trouble is we got out of hand. We have wars. We cut off legs in a war and blow it up, and the germs come in, and so it didn't work. The Creator's plan didn't work like the plan because we got so frisky. So, but, praise the Lord, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin that we can use and kill the bacteria when it's hit. So that's the fate of bacteria. Viruses are different, and they just are, and they're a menace. Well, hello, that's all you hear on the TV.
I know.
I mean, you can't find anything else except the election virus. So you better like one of them. I mean, all right, the fate of the virus is that it enters the same way. It's going to enter through mucous membranes or through the skin. So, either one, it's going to do both. Once it gets into the bloodstream, you remember we had 5 white cells. One of them rushes and phagocytizes. That's your segmented neutrophils, polysegs, polymorphs, remember? It only does that to bacteria. Lymphocytes, one of the 5, fights viruses. So as soon as that virus enters the bloodstream, the 5 rush to it, and lymphocytes says, I've got it. It's a virus. I'll take care of it. Everybody else backs off. And so the lymphocytes try the phagocytizing, and it may work. And again, you're fine. You didn't even know you were sick. You felt a little bad, but now feel great. So you didn't even know you had a virus. But let's say it's a strong virus and your body is not resisting well. So it's now really rampant. And so the same thing. It triggers the brain to do fever. So far we're doing the same, but that's where it kind of ends. The change is that we don't have bacteria, we don't have an antibiotic to kill viruses. But the body has a mechanism that goes far beyond the bacteria, and it is that if we have those 5, well, they've all dropped back and left lymphocytes. But they describe it as, there's T cells, the T cells. And there are 5 of them, 4 or 5. And first is, not helper 2. Maybe it was helper 2. It is like a police commissioner. That's what it was described when I read it. The helper T realizes, that's a virus, and viruses are my business. T cells, viruses are their business. Okay, this is my business. And it operates like a police commissioner, doesn't do any killing, doesn't do anything, but carry a report back. They need help. Will you help them? And I describe it as putting in data. The police commissioner takes back data to the headquarters, puts it in the computer. Well, that's our lymphatic system. And so our helper T takes the data. They say he takes a picture of it, of the skirmish, takes it to our lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system goes through and says, he had the same virus when he was 4 years old. I've got antibodies for it. I'll send them. And so shoots out those antibodies, and that's your, 12-hour virus. I just had a virus for 12 hours or whatever. So that's a beautiful thing if you had made antibodies when you were 4 years old for that same virus. But let's say the lymphatic system, the computer says, I don't have any antibody to fight that. So I'll have to make you one. So the lymphatic system makes an antibody because they have the picture that was taken. Well, what happens where the accident's going on? Well, the body has some beautiful things going. It has, they say there's about 10 or 12 proteins that get around it, like the spokes of a wheel, and detonate it. We've got killer cells that with chemicals are trying to kill it. Anything that are all T's, killer T's, I guess it's just killer T's, and then I almost said the proteins, the 12 proteins that are trying to detonate it. And so they're trying to keep it in check while the antibody is being made, because that's something to discuss with the creator. Why does it take 7 to 10 days to make an antibody for a virus? We need it now, but the body does make up by having the proteins kill, the killer T's kill, lymphocyte chemicals are trying to kill, but here's the antibody being made. they say the common cold, that's the reason a common cold only lasts 7 to 10 days. It takes that long, because it's a virus apparently. It takes that long for the antibody to take. That's why they say you can take all those things, antihistamines and things to make you feel better, but nothing is going to get rid of the virus until the antibody's made in 7 to 10 days. And you know, a cold usually lasts that long, your common cold. What does the president say? Or Limbaugh says that this virus is like the common cold. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, oh my goodness. So, oh my goodness. So, now, once the antibody's made, it just goes, kills that virus, and you're great. The trouble is, while it's being made, and the detonation and the killing of the viruses multiply, your body is weak and worn out, and it's so easy to get a bacteria. Now, we've got a bacterial problem. So that's why a lot of people who has a virus end up on an antibiotic, because your body's so worn down. And that's where the best thing we can do is take care of our body while the antibodies are being made. But you know, you've got jobs to do, children and family and meals to fix, and we don't go to bed with chicken soup and fluids. So that's a beautiful thing, and that's what happens, the fate of the virus, the fate of bacteria. What happens with HIV? What went wrong there? And well, if you read about HIV, it says an immobility of the immune system. Immobility. Well, I guess so. A betrayal. I've also read it's a betrayal of the immune system, because HIV is a virus. So why is it not doing just the 5 lymphocytes go fight it? It does. All that happens, but the most elementary way that I can get around it, and if anything in nursing and medicine is being researched, I think it's this, because it changes their ideas, change some on the HIV. But the most sensible to me explanation that I've had lately is that the body recognizes, oh, it's a virus, and so the lymphocytes grab it, but they cannot overtake it. And so they keep working. Helper T, the commissioner, comes, and instead of taking a good, clear picture of the skirmish, it joins them. And so it's a betrayal of the immune system, because it was to take a picture and take it back to the lymphatic system and make an antibody. Now, it is HIV positive, you have antibodies. So some just get back. So the statement is that the commissioner did not live up to what they were supposed to do, but a few bad pictures of the skirmish gets back to the computer, the lymphatic system. I always imagine they just kind of cripple back, because the commissioner is joining the party over here, and a few get back enough that antibodies are made, because you're HIV positive means you've got the antibodies. So some got back, but none of it was a healthy exchange. So the antibodies, they're there, but were they any good to us? Not much, because you are now HIV positive. And the best way I can, so you've got some antibodies, but they didn't show like they were going to do great. You've still got your cluster, and that, don't tell a physiologist that, because that doesn't sound right. But you've got that conglomerate, and it can stay indefinitely. You're going to always be HIV positive, but you might live years and years and years, and that connection, that betrayal, has not ruptured, hasn't burst forth. the viruses are not running loose, particularly really. It's kind of caught, I call it magnetized. Now this is all my talk, but from what I've read, this is the best I can come up with. And so you may be forever just like that, and you die HIV positive. You never got full blown. If this bus, you may get full blown. And what could blow it? Radiation, narcotics, a huge illness, something big happens to you that throws your homeostasis, and in doing so, throws the system. And you now have actual viruses flowing. Now, and you're overtaken. And how do we know? I think they said there's like, lot of symptoms of AIDS, but there are only one or two or maybe three that are specific for AIDS. You could say anemic, but we get anemic on lots of things. But the things that are real HIV diagnosable are the low T cells. I was going to say, I think they're under 200, not that you have to know that, but the T cells are really low. You have night sweats, but that is, a lot of people have night sweats, so you can't count that. The other one is Kaposi's sarcoma. It's sores, it's cancer, a skin cancer, but it's a cancer that doesn't, I tell people it's like radiation. It starts going deeper and deeper and deeper. It's like radiation would. If you had a bump here, it just keeps going deep, deep, deep into bone, and that's your sarcoma, Kaposi's sarcoma. Pneumonistic pneumonia. And now there's one that everybody that has pneumonistic pneumonia doesn't have AIDS, but if you've got AIDS, you probably have pneumonistic pneumonia. And so, so I've told you three that are pretty identical to AIDS: pneumocystic pneumonia, Kaposi's sarcoma, and T cells down. The fourth one, and there are lots of others, I've got a list: weakness, fatigue, but don't count them. If you're anemic, you're going to be all that. The other one is a kinesis. They have a shuffle, if you've ever seen. They walk shuffling, and it's usually, if they've got AIDS, a lot of times they do that. Where are we in cure, resting it? And I can't tell you. I know there was a Vanderbilt physician that was doing surgery on an AIDS patient and went through his glove, and he got the virus. And he's done a lot of treatment on himself. And I think the last case we looked him up, Johnson, I think it's Johnston or Johnson, Melton Johnson. He's gone elsewhere. He's still alive. We found that out last time. And there are all kinds of drugs that they're using to try to keep your T cells up. So there may be a breakthrough someday for it, a real breakthrough.
Like that guy, Magic Johnson.
Huh?
Magic Johnson.
Yeah, and then Magic Johnson is a pretty good poster child for a long life that's been pretty decent. Huh?
Since 1985.
Is it
85.
85, really? Magic Johnson. Isn't that wonderful? Now, the thing is, this is how that virus is, if you can believe this. The period on your paper, now it just takes one virus, but the period on your paper has about 230 million viruses. So that you can imagine that if intercourse is either rectal or vaginal, if there's an abrased area in the vaginal canal or the rectal, And it doesn't take anything for that virus to get in. And that's why I'm so surprised on Magic that Cookie, his wife, is not HIV positive. And
She was pregnant at the time too,
Uh-huh.
right? And the baby
Uh-huh.
isn't either. That I
No,
couldn't understand
I know
that.
I know it. Well,
That's bizarre.
the only thing it means is that her mucous membranes are fabulous.
Intact.
You know,
Very fabulous, I guess.
yeah, that they were so thick. And then, of course, I'm sure after that it was some safety precautions. But yeah, it had to mean she had no abrasion, or she'd have gotten it, no question about it. So, let's see. Let me see if there's anything else. Now this is HIV Will Die in 30% alcohol, and that is our alcohol swabs. So, it's not as strong as we think it is. If an alcohol swab could kill it, so that's good to know. While I'm on it, I mentioned but I just think it's interesting. We've got the helper T's like the commissioner. We've got the killer that kills while we're making antibody. But we've got then, this is the oddest one, suppressor. Suppressor T's stop the production of all the activity, the poisons and all that. If you read about suppressor T's, it's going to say nobody knows how they know to quit. And chronic fatigue syndrome, they say, is that suppressor T's do not quit pouring out all those chemicals and trying to kill the virus when it doesn't need to be, and your body is just producing so many kinases that it makes you chronic fatigue. So suppressor T is an odd one that may be influencing chronic fatigue syndrome. Then memory. And memory T's are the ones that when the helper T brought it back to the lymphatic system said, they had this when they were 6 years old. I'll pull out the old antibodies. And I think I told you, the beautiful thing about our body is our antibodies, when we're bleeding out, the antibodies rush to the bone marrow and hide like an ostrich. So that I've said, Kitty Wells, when she lost 33 units of blood after her accident and died, if she had lived, she lost, I don't know how much, she was replaced with 33. If she had lived, now she had 33 units of somebody else's blood, but if she had lived, she would have her same antibodies because they hid while she was suffering. When she was losing her blood, the antibodies won't go with the flow. Won't go with the flow. How's that? Isn't that miraculous? It's just fabulous. All right, now let's see. What else? Any other question that you might have? Our immune system, I think right now we need to talk about it, don't we?
Yeah.
And doing all the precautions. But this says to boost the immune system, less fat foods, more proteins, because the proteins increase the production of T cells. Proteins help the lymphatic system activity and antibody production. Exercise will increase white blood count and endorphins. Exercise, I don't think it has to be an enormous amount, but some exercise. And then 6 glasses of water. And now, the final thing for today is psychogenic illnesses. I want to talk about them. And we kind of touched on it, if I can find my paper. Psycho is emotional. Genesis starts from an emotional area or level. And let's see if it's back here. It doesn't mean it can be emotional, but ultimately it is physiological. It's not hypochondriasis. You're not a hypochondriac if you've got psychogenic illnesses. So psycho, it starts with emotions, but the emotions can be part of why you're physically down. And when I mention them, they've been researched, and it's decision of research that's pretty definite that these are illnesses that stress or change or something that changed your homeostasis, and through your something changed your homeostasis, and it could be in the weather, it could have been mental stress, it could have been physical stress, it could have been loss of sleep, loss of no good appetite, but it was something that changed your homeostasis, and you allowed it mentally. There's some classic ones, and they're the ones I wanted to go over. The classic psychogenic illnesses, and they're real. They're very real. So it's no hypochondriasis. They're not hypochondriacs. They really have the illness, but the illness was started because of a problem that could have been stress or psychological or whatever. One is appendicitis, and I've had people say, now I know a 3-year-old that had, well, hey, 3-year-olds have stress too. And so appendicitis is one. One time when I was floor nursing, any person with appendicitis, I'd ask them, and one or two would say, I'd say, when you're getting the history, okay, now has there been anything stressful? And it was fascinating. It might be a job they lost, but it was 2 months ago. I'm fine now, I've got a great job. And a lot of times it is a rebound. And so I realized it could be rebound after the fact. And I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned it to y'all, Dr. Fred Goldner. I think he's still alive. I see him occasionally at a church function. He's Jewish, and sometimes they meet together. But Doctor, I don't know how, he's got to be nearly 100. But he's been around a long time, and I have too, and he was around before I was. But at the hospital where I took students years ago, it was before hospitals got sprosy. I mean, they were just tile floors, just basic utilitarian. Then do you remember they went to carpet? Now they're back to regular floors. Well, it was when they were ugly and utilitarian. Dr. Goldner had his hypertensive room, and it was wonderful. It was like a living room. Lamps with low lights and carpet and overstuffed chairs. We used to have conferences in there. Dr. Goldner's hypertensive room. Dr. Goldner, and I don't do it now because I just don't see him. But up until a year or so ago, I'd see him and I'd say, Dr. Goldner, you know you were ahead of your time. He really was. It was before anybody put together that hypertension is a psychogenic illness, that it's tension against the vessels that are just tightening and holding. And Dr. Goldner knew that if he took those patients in that room, they would relax and talk about what was bothering them or whatever. So hypertension is one. You can say, now, well, let's talk about salt and diet. You can do that. That's fine. I'd be glad to talk to you about it. But if you really get down to it, something is angsting, usually a lot of hypertensive people, if that's all that's going on. the GI problems, and you know that yourself, ulcerative colitis. Now, there's a personality, they say, that has ulcerative colitis, the uptight person, and that they get it. And it's considered. You find somebody with ulcerative colitis, and I bet they are a compulsive person. Usually they are. Where peptic ulcer is considered psychogenic, and they are loving and kind, and the idea on them is that they have internalized everything, to the GI, to a sore, to eating I don't know whether you know any peptic ulcer people, and I don't meet as many as I used to, but nicest people, sweet people, nice people, and they said it's just so internalized. A lot of times, rheumatoid arthritis, same thing. Now, not osteo. They say osteo is not psychogenic, but that rheumatoid is, where they have their anger and their angst is all pushed into the joints. You know somebody like that, or are you like that?
It's reasonable.
It's all you were putting it over.
Shingles, you know, shingles is the virus, the chickenpox virus, and so you get chickenpox, and then the virus is there, and the antibodies are here, praise the Lord, but they dormant. They're in the base of the brain, and when you're under stress is when you get it. It pops out and comes back out in the form of shingles. And I knew a neighbor who asked me to come across the hall. He was by himself. His wife had died. And he said he was hurting in his... He had a long history of years earlier of ulcers. And he said, you know, I'm having a pain in my stomach. And so I had him lay down and felt. Now, you don't feel anything unless it's bad. So the fact I didn't feel anything, I didn't know, you know, I only was looking for something abnormal. But he, a year earlier, had gallbladder surgery. So it wasn't the gallbladder. And I said, you know, it may be your ulcer flaring. So he and I tried some things. And we tried bland. And then we tried not bland, and he wasn't any different any way we did. Diet didn't do. So finally I said to him, I said, let's just go to the doctor. I'll go with you. So I did. We went to the doctor, and the doctor said, we just did it. I'm telling what I'm telling now. I said to him, I said he had a history of ulcers. They have been dormant, but maybe it started again. And so the doctor said, okay, take off the shirt and everything. I'm going to step out, and when I come back, we'll do examination. And so it is funny, I think. I helped him get out of his shirt. He laid down, waiting on the doctor. He's got his pants on. The doctor came in and came over, and my friend had a zit right here on the side, just a white head. Are you understanding me? A white head. And the doctor says, he's ready, and I'm curious, you know, what he's going. And he stops and he says, what is this? I said, oh, it's looks like whitehead or something like move on, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't come in here for a whitehead. So I said, oh, I don't know. He said, well, and he takes it, doesn't pinch it, he just looks at it. He said, how long have you had that? And my friend said, I don't even know what you're talking about. And the doctor looks at me and says, you know what I'm thinking, don't you? Well, what kind of eruption comes out on the side? And I said, shingles? And he said, yeah. And I said, really? Because I said, now I would never have thought. He said, you're a hospital nurse. You don't see it. My nurses see it a mile away. And his symptoms did not equal anything. So, of course, the doctor was ready to see something that was and sees this. And indeed, it was shingles. And my friend said, oh, my, he said, I know friends that are in the Southern Baptist Convention and that was the time that the Southern Baptist Convention was having an upheaval. They've got shingles and have had it 5 and 6 years. And I told him, I said, it's because they're in turmoil. Now you've got a good support system, and I'm across the hall, you're gonna have a support system. So anyway, shingles is an interesting thing, so don't forget it. And you know, it's unilateral. I mean, you don't see it, isn't that right? You don't see it both sides or something like that. Let's see, appendicitis, asthma, is that psychogenic? Urinary, upper respiratories, autoimmunes are that, are psychogenic. The common cold, easy to get a virus if you're low. If your resistance is low, it's easy to get sick, and that's psychogenic. This will get you, diabetes mellitus, they say is. And if you do your own research and ask diabetics, tell me about when you first got it. So often it was an illness, some big, huge illness, or a big incident. And it's so interesting to do your own research on that. Menorrhea, a lot of women quit menstruating under stress, and that's psychogenic. Urticaria, well, you and I know the acne or bumps on the face. Back problems, varicosity, clot, I didn't mean varicosity, clots. And so keep that in mind that with psychogenic illness, this is the best place, talking it out, saying it. Better if you don't do it to all your friends and wear them out. It's better if there's a therapist, but you may not be able to afford that. So, but anyway, the expressing it, working it on yourself is good too, processing it, but also sharing with somebody that won't be judgmental on your stress or whatever. That's the best way. Some places, institutions have animals that let patients have an animal where they can bury their face and cry and talk to an animal. All right.